Welcome to the Gnostic Warrior, Tom. How are you doing today?
Great, Mo. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And before we get into your great work, can you tell the Gnostic Warrior audience a little bit about who you are and your background?
Sure. I'm a historian by trade. Um, I am a psychonaut by design. Um, I'm a witch by birth. um, and that's, I don't know, that's pretty much, you know, it, details of my life will probably come out as we just, have a conversation. That's
Sure.
usually how, I can't really think of. I kind of just woke up like 10 minutes ago. So,
Definitely, yeah. And most people aren't used to like giving an autobiography of their life, off the cuff. So no
yeah.
problem. And
And I know that people often say that their self is their favorite subject to talk about. Myself is actually my least favorite subject to talk about. So I like talking about research and, insights that I hope, I've come across and that I hope people dig. But talking about myself is just not a strong point for me at all.
I concur. I'm the same way. I feel, many of us, Tom, we connect on the internet through the filaments of the internet, basically on ideas and how we come across one another's work. And I told you that, I was researching psilocybin mushrooms and came across your work. I'm familiar with Jan Irving, who we're going to talk a little bit about in this podcast. Um, but what advice do you have for people out there, that are just getting into this research? They'll come across, say, Jan Irving's work or someone else that claims they're this expert spiritual guru, and they're just kind of venturing into this realm of learning about psilocybin mushrooms, how to do them, what they should do, the dose. I mean, can we take someone through the kind of the baby steps maybe before we get into the cult and esoteric stuff we like to talk about?
Sure. The first thing I would say, and this is kind of hard for a lot of people to hear these days, is that Google is not an ending point. It's a starting point. And I think that it's easy to, it's very simple to simply Google the answer you desire and find, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 hits that shows that this thing you believe is true. But that's not really the way research is done. Or, I mean, sadly, that is the way research is done these days. But if you want to actually get as close as you can to truth, that takes discipline and it takes years of study and it takes a lot of trying to prove yourself wrong. Um, the conclusions that I've come to in my life with my research are not the conclusions that that I started when I began my research. Sorry, that my sentences are just, I'm still finding their
Sure.
way from my brain to my mouth right now. But what I mean is that I had to change my mind a lot. And today it's a little difficult because you have an entire generation that has been raised with this instant gratification kind of mentality and paradigm. And it's sadly, truth and seeking truth as an art form is dying. It is being killed by Google. Google is destroying it. And now that's nobody's fault. And that's the thing. We all kind of play into this game without realizing it. It's what I call the Matrix. The Matrix is very real. It's not like how it was, depicted in the movie of the same name, but it's a very real thing in that you get locked into certain paradigms that might not actually exist in the world, and you then will act out a drama due to a lack of gnosis or self-knowledge, and here we are, Gnostic Warrior, believing that these things are true. So if I may give two examples from two, might strike some people as two sides of, or might strike people as being very different, but they're actually two sides of a similar coin. And that is, who would be good? Okay, so people that tend to like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez don't like Rush Limbaugh and vice versa. I see them as the same thing. They're just two people trying to manipulate your mind so that for purposes of power and control over you. And so The same thing could be said about, and now this feeds into life with what we just saw with the Capitol building, where all those people stormed the Capitol building because they believed that an election was stolen. Now, there's no evidence whatsoever that the election was stolen, just like there's no evidence 4 years ago that the election was stolen. It's actually kind of hard to steal. It's a little more, it's a little more complicated than, the kinds of just memes that come up on your social media feed. So what those people were doing was acting out a drama because the world suddenly didn't make sense for them and they have not achieved gnosis. They don't know anything about self-knowledge. So they're picking a script to act out to kind of give their life meaning. On the other side of that, on let's say the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez side, some of your listeners might remember that shrieking girl at Yale. Do you know who I'm talking about, Mo? She was yelling at her professor because she was feeling oppressed or and unsafe at Yale. Do you know who I'm referring to?
I'm not sure. No, there's been so
Okay,
many.
sure. Well, there
So
was a young girl that was obviously fed a whole lot of nonsense on the other side of the coin, the leftist side of the coin. And even though she, I don't remember what she was, I think Hispanic, and she was also from a very wealthy family from Connecticut and at Yale. So more privilege than I've ever seen as a white person, I'll tell you that much. But all of her professors and people on her side and the kinds of politicians and social manipulators that she would listen to had all convinced her that she was oppressed. She's not at all. So she didn't know what to do with that energy because her entire life has been one of privilege. So she started acting out this drama. And the truth is, from that shrieking girl to those people that stormed the Capitol, to Rush Limbaugh, to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I just feel bad for all of them. They're less to be ridiculed and more to be pitied because they're acting out these dramas that don't actually exist because they have not achieved gnosis.
that makes perfect sense. And what that made me think of was, that theory that we're living in this simulated reality. I would think that these people that live in these reality tunnels that are false, and they're almost like mythical tales that their overlords are telling them without them seeking their own knowledge. It's as if they're being controlled in these simulated realities. There actually are simulated realities because they're not real.
Yeah, exactly. There are lots of things that don't actually exist anywhere else but on your mobile device. The wage gap would be a perfect example. That's not a real thing. Mathematically it's impossible, but people believe it exists for one reason or another, even though it doesn't. People believe that that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris just stole the election from Donald Trump, even though they didn't. More people just voted for the Democrats, which there's only two choices. It's either going to go one way or the other in this country. So so yeah, exactly, Mo. These are simulated realities. That is the Matrix. That's what it
Sure.
is. It is this, but it's more. It's a little different again from like the movie Matrix or like or simulation theory in that this is a matrix that is created by the individual to play out these dramas instead of looking inward and achieving gnosis.
Interesting, because we all have that same ability, Tom, where you're at. Where do you live in the United States?
I live in Portland, Oregon.
Okay. And I'm in, San Diego, California. There's people that are, yeah, there's people listening from all over the world, and we have basically, depending on where you live in the West, we have this freedom to kind of choose say the personality, the persona that we want to put on or that we want to basically pursue. And then we could also change those personas based on what we've learned. And to be honest with you, when I first tried to achieve gnosis, I missed it several times, and I went down these false reality tunnels, not realizing they were there, not
Yes.
realizing that there was actually people or agencies or nefarious three-letter agencies that are putting disinformation out there, or it's just well-meaning people that are just regurgitating bullshit that I'm coming across, right? And then
Yes.
you come across it and they look like you and me, and hey, this guy's got the answer, and reality it's not. And that's why you got to go deeper and deeper and deeper to really find the facts.
Yeah, and I mean you and everybody. And this is why I said these people shouldn't be ridiculed, because I've been down those paths, and I mean I've had ideas in my life and in my youthful indiscretion days that are absolutely ridiculous, that I'm like embarrassed, like, oh, I can't believe I thought that, I can't believe I believed that. So what I think would serve us all a lot better is to stop ridiculing all these people, and understand that everybody is struggling, everybody is going through something in their life, and nobody has it all that easy. And if you think you can sum a person up by something they once said on Facebook, and that one post dictates everything their entire lifespan, that's a little unfair and ridiculous, and people do that all the time. I
Sure.
think it gives comfort. It's, we derive a lot of comfort by being able to point out an enemy. And so I try my best to stay uncomfortable, because there are fewer enemies out there than we really than actually exist. Again, a lot of these things are just created by us because we don't have that inward knowledge of who we actually are. We don't have that recognition that each one of us is a slice, as Carl Sagan, the great Carl Sagan said, a slice of the universe getting to know itself. So although it's a vast universe and there are certainly some black holes out there, um, but so I try my best to keep that in mind and just be kind moving forward, as difficult as it can be sometimes. We all need to be a little nicer to each other.
True. And then we could also say the other side of the coin, Tom, is if we go back, you introduced yourself as one of the terms as a witch, right? And some of these people that lack gnosis, that lack, this knowledge, will be the first ones to burn the witch, to burn the
Absolutely.
Gnostic, right? So
Of
in the
course.
same breath, we could be apathetic to them and sympathetic, excuse me, but they can be dangerous,
Oh, oh yeah. I mean, there are
so
still places in the world where witches are burned, or
yes.
not burned, but they're executed. I mean, there's places in the world where I'd be executed for being gay. There's places in the world where if you're a little girl trying to learn how to read, some holy figure, holy go figure, will throw acid in your face and
Mhm.
permanently cripple you for life, simply because you're a young girl trying to learn how to read. And those people definitely need to, like, those people do need to be faced, absolutely. But here, I'm not worried about anybody. Like what they do in Iran, they put gay people in cages and drown them. I'm not really worried about anybody doing that to me here. I'm not worried about anybody throwing acid in some little girl's face. I mean, we despise those kinds of actions. So we're fortunate in that way. As for all this country's faults, and there are many, it does, there are some really pretty awesome things when you put it in a global perspective and a historical perspective of essentially the muck that all humanity grew out of. We got pretty lucky. I wouldn't want to be alive at any other place at any other time than right here and right now.
I've said that many times myself, in other countries I would have been killed many times over. I'm actually a multi drug offender. I've been to jail and to prison for my drug addiction and drug sales when I was younger. It's been over 20 years, but I would have been beheaded like 4 times in Saudi Arabia, right? Or in China. I would have got the rifle 4 times over, and I wouldn't be here doing this podcast. So I agree with you. And then we also have this thing that's happening, and I know we're kind of going off rail here, but it all kind of ties into what we're talking about, is the freedoms slowly being eroded. You talked about Google, dictating what is truth, or dictating what someone is going to find when they search. And then now people such as yourself, I'm not saying that you, but other people that are trying to put knowledge out there and be someone who can give some of these people that are looking for those truths, they're getting deplatformed, they're getting censored, and so forth. So it's as if some of these freedoms that our country and still are slowly eroding as well by these people that lack gnosis of what our country was built upon.
Sure.
So again, I know this isn't a political
Oh,
podcast, but it's important, because I think some of the inroads that have been made in psychedelics and with mushrooms as well, that could be slowly turned upon, and the freedoms that you've enjoyed as being a gay man in the United States and being free and not to worry about being attacked or to be persecuted. What if they go after that?
yeah, sure. I mean, well, in high school, I was definitely attacked, but in my adult life, I mean,
Just by teenagers being bully dicks, right?
yeah, of course, and
Yeah.
that's teenagers they can be bullies, and of course, I was bullied mercilessly as a kid. Um, so
They lack gnosis, they lack knowledge, right?
yeah, it's a lack of gnosis,
Sure.
and again, it's more to be pitied because I mean, I to this day I still feel bad for some of them. Every now and then the curiosity gets the best of you, and you do search on social media to try to find how that bully is doing, and some of them they're really not doing too good, and
Yeah,
so it's like, what am I going to do? Continue to hate them over something they did 15 years or however many years ago? Like
sure.
it's it's more I feel bad for them than anything else because I mean my life today is I wouldn't trade it for any. I love my life is fantastic. So
Yeah.
like
And we
and
know a lot now, Tom, and sorry to interrupt you, that a lot
oh,
of these people that abuse people, whether it's bullying at school, they're usually the ones being abused, whether it's at home or by other people. And then if they continue to act that out when they're older, they abuse their wives, and then it just turns into this big circle thing of crime. And like you said, they end up from their sins, whatever you want to put it, they end up karma, whatever comes around, and their lives are terrible now because of the choices they made, and hating other people for how they lived and ideas and trying to control them with violence.
sure, well, hurt people.
True.
So and see, I one thing I got to say, see, this is isn't this better than giving any biography? All your listeners know me better now than me trying to say, oh, when I was 10 this happened, like you know
Yeah, and we're getting to know each other. This is the first time that we've talked, and it's interesting. As growing up, I defended other people from that, and then I was bullied by a neighbor that was actually my best friend for 3 years, and he used to beat the heck out of me every day. And then I ended up becoming a bully for about a year. And then I turned on some of my best friends that were weaker, and then I realized what I was doing and started hating myself, and I changed the way I was, and then I became like, don't f with me, but I'm not gonna screw with people. But I always became the defender of the weak. So my life, actually, about 7 years ago, there was a young kid. It was at a punk rock concert, and he was being beaten by skinheads, and there was other guys, just watching, and I went in to try to help the guy, and ended up almost getting beat to death. Broke my back, multiple skull fractures. So that's kind of where my life has led. But again, you said, hurt people hurt, and the same thing can be said probably about people that get into skinhead stuff and stuff like
oh
that. But
yeah, well, that's one of those imaginary dramas like racism today. It's this is like there's very clearly no need for it. I mean, there never has been, but like that's just it's somebody who doesn't know themselves is picking this particular simulated drama to act out, and sadly, as in with your case, that unfortunately will lead to violence sometimes, and I'm sorry to hear that happened to you, but also thank you for stepping in and trying to help that kid that was getting his ass kicked. Can I ask what band were you seeing?
the Addicts GBH, the
Oh
Exploited.
wow.
Yeah, it was called
Oh
the
wow.
The British Invasion concert here.
Sure,
So it,
sure.
it actually culminated into a riot, and they burned down half of San Bernardino after that. So that ended up into a feeding frenzy. I actually survived because there was so many people trying to beat me, they couldn't get to me, and then it just turned into a big riot, and it was pretty crazy. But what ended up culminating from that is the guy that held the concert was notorious for basically holding unsafe concerts where several children and people were beat and stabbed. So this was like a a constant thing, and the guy was doing it, you know, for profit. So he was cutting down on hiring security, which essentially was off-duty police guards, because you know these concerts get violent. So,
Yeah.
but
Oh, I've been to many punk and hardcore shows in my day, so I
yeah,
feel you on
so
that.
yeah, long story short, not only did I stick up for the guy, you know, I ended up almost dying, but in the long run, people's lives were saved from this guy who was just holding crazy concerts, you know. But this gets me to the one of the questions that I had, and you know, let's get into your work. Is there's people out there that maybe shouldn't do mushrooms. Do you feel that everybody in their current mental state should partake in psilocybin mushrooms? And can you give advice to those people out there that are on the fence and I'm not sure if they have the mental capacity to take a trip?
Yeah, absolutely not. They should not. If you're on the fence, do not eat mushrooms. Just that's, you know, that's really it. If you're on the fence, or um if you're feeling depressed, or well, because mushrooms can actually help with depression. I mean, it's a tough question because, you know, it's
Maybe if
different
we could, yeah, the depressed, sorry to interrupt you, maybe because I've thought about that too, because I've done it many times. You know, the depressed where you're depressed and kind of down with life, trying to look for answers. Maybe it might be the answer, but depressed, suicidal, maybe not.
Yeah, depressed,
Right.
suicidal. I mean, I caution telling anybody to do anything. But I have a very good relationship, an ongoing relationship with mushrooms. I've never had a bad trip. I don't know what that is. I communicate very well with them. But I definitely don't think, you know, they're for everybody. Look, driving a car isn't for everybody, you know.
Mhm.
Like there's lots of things that are not for everybody, which is a shame because mushrooms are fucking awesome. And um you know, I go back and forth where it's like, yeah, would somebody be, you know, less of a jerk if they ate some mushrooms and were humbled like by it? Like that's one of the things I say. Like I kind of went from if you can't tell by the way I sound, I'm a guinea from New York. So the phrase "go fuck yourself" has come out of my mouth more times than I care to count. But I've changed that recently, and now I just say "go humble yourself" because that's
Awesome.
what's needed more. And yeah, if you're suicidal, definitely don't do that. Don't eat mushrooms or ayahuasca or anything really. I wouldn't even smoke cannabis, you know. And I'm saying this as somebody who was once suicidal. But then, so here's the other part of it. The reason I'm not suicidal is because of ayahuasca. Like ayahuasca saved my life, like legit saved my life. So it's really difficult for me sometimes to answer this question because I don't want to give anybody poor advice, but at the same time, these medicines certainly saved my life, you know. But it's just difficult
Yeah, and
to
let's kind of revert there to ayahuasca. You know, this isn't just about mushrooms. This is about, you know, just a philosophical conversation, and we want to try to give people good information. So maybe there are people that'll come across this podcast and they're like, wait, a second, I might shouldn't venture into mushrooms or psychedelics. But what about this ayahuasca? What can you tell people about your experience and what it will do for them?
Well, I can't account for what it's going to do for anybody. I could just account for what it did for me, which was um, give me, how could I? It showed me one of the things when you grow up queer in New York in the 90s, which thankfully nobody has to do that anymore. There's not a you don't get a lot of love, and you're not taught self-love. In fact, you're taught self-shame. And what ayahuasca showed me was that it's okay to like myself. I still don't, but I at least know that it's okay to do that. I will say this, when I first had ayahuasca, this was a few years ago, the next morning was the first time in my life that I actually looked in the mirror and smiled. I had never done that before. So, you know what I mean? Like it did something really powerful for me.
And it was just
It's
like automatic kind of. You just looked and smiled and then realized you smiled. Wow,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty
Well,
heavy. How
but
old
it
were you?
was 37, 36,
Wow.
37. I'd always used mushrooms were always my medicine of choice. Ayahuasca is the kind of thing that I don't think you should seek out. She will let you know when you're ready. Gaia will let you know. Pachamama, she'll let you know. I had no plans on ever taking ayahuasca, and she was just like, "Okay, it's time." And I guess the most important thing that she showed me, and I'll never, this is seared in my mind. My body was laying on an operating table, and there were all these, for lack of a better word, light beings that were operating on me. And she said, "Look, do you see this?" And she pointed to this really dirty glass. And I recognized that as my heart. And that's what it was, like this dirt. She says, "No, no, 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 that's actually not." And they wiped the glass. And underneath that dirt, there was this pure heart there. They're like, "That's like she's like, "You don't like yourself because you think when you look at that dirt that that's what your heart is. But look, see under, you see this
Mhm.
pristine beating machine here? It's like, that's really your heart." And so they cleaned the glass, the protective shell that we all kind of, over time, it calcifies, I think, for a lot of people, just this thickness and this gunk over it. Now, that glass is good because it's there to protect your heart, but it does get dirty over time, and you do need to kind of windshield wipe it every now and then. And ayahuasca was really great for me for, windshield wiping, breaking out the Ajax and the Mr. Clean and cleaning that glass off so that I could see, no, that's not real. My heart isn't that muck. My heart is that thing underneath that, and it actually is pure. So,
That's a beautiful story.
yeah,
Yeah, I
that
mean, it brought
was
tears to my eyes, man. So,
well, there was a lot. I mean, there was a whole lot of other things. I mean, she showed me how universes formed. I mean, it was so cool. Like, I was
mhm.
standing with Gaia, and she was holding my hand, and we were just standing on this platform looking out into space, just out into the cosmos. And she's like, "Look," she's like, "I'm going to show you the building blocks of the universe." She's like, "Oh, like, you want to see something cool?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And so she put her hands together and she just expanded, and this galaxy just formed, and she pushed it out into space. And she's like, "You can do that. All of you, all humans, like, you are all part of this universe. You are creative forces of this universe. It's like, so try it." And I went like this, and boom, and all of a sudden this galaxy just formed out of my head. I was like, "Oh my God," it was so cool looking, and it's seared in my mind. And that's when she's like, "Do you want me to show you more?" I was like, "Mother Gaia, show me everything." She said, "Well, we're going to leave your body on this operating table for a little bit so that you can come with me." And so then we just kind of sailed through the universe, and she just showed me how planets form. She showed me how dirt forms inside the planet, and how grass comes out of that, and how the wheat comes out of that, and how the smallest creeping critters come out of that, and the smaller animals, and just, like, just all the way up to us. And it was really, if you're, I guess, getting back to your question, if you're interested in seeing what that looks like, then ayahuasca is right for you. But if you're, if you have a history of mental illness, then I would really consider dealing with that stuff first. And it's this weird kind of balancing act, because I don't want to tell somebody that has, harsh traumas, "Go eat these medicines," because some bad stuff can happen. But at the same time, these medicines help heal those traumas, which is, I think, a lot of it comes down to the context in how you take these medicines. I don't like I've never eaten mushrooms or acid and gone to a keg party. When I eat my mushrooms, I mean, if you could see back here, that's my altar to Gaia. I mean, I light candles, incenses, I say prayers, I do banishing rituals, I do a whole lot of stuff to make sure that, these, negative entities, which are out there in the universe, it's not everything is love and light. There is love and light out there, but there is also loneliness and despair. That also exists, because we wouldn't have love and light unless there were loneliness and despair. And out of these things, that's where these different entities form. So Gaia is love and light, but you could meet up with some pretty bad actors, from the loneliness and despair parts of the universe, and that could, make your trauma even worse. So I would definitely, make sure that you have some kind of contemplative practice, even if it's going to church every Sunday and praying to Jesus. I'm not prejudiced against anybody's belief systems. I know some witches can be, but I'm not. If that's what works for you and you're living a better life because you're a Christian, more power to you. Definitely stick with that. And just something like that. If you're the kind of person that prays every night, any kind of contemplative practice, meditation, yoga, prayer, any of those things are all primers for an entheogenic experience.
That's what I think people here in the West have missed. And I believe, listening to you and thinking about this as I'm listening to you about these rituals, is that we don't have that many people like you do here with your altar to Gaia, when you take mushrooms. And, these people that aren't in the right frame of mind, that are possibly taking these mushrooms and going to keg parties and not really understanding the entities and spirits that they might come across. And if they don't have gnosis, they could lose their mind. And,
Yeah.
I feel, I would listen to a podcast recently with Joe Rogan. And the reason I bring this up is because the guy that he had on the podcast was a professor from Columbia University, and his name's Dr. Carl Hart. But he he openly, really knowledgeable guy, neuroscientist, and he openly talked about drugs. But he did not really say who should use them. He said basically, it's not the drug, it's the person, which I agree. But he didn't define for, the listeners exactly what he meant by that, and just basically people that don't understand this and do this and go crazy are just stupid people. I don't feel that's the case. I feel they're just misinformed, and then it's dangerous for, someone to go onto a podcast that's going to be listened by tens of millions of people and not disclose, and that's my issue with decriminalization is, I feel, that we should have this access to drugs and safe drugs, but there should be, say, people like you in Portland where, people have to go to before they partake, maybe like a local shaman, and then, maybe they have a mental health profile, and maybe they should try some ecstasy first and maybe microdose before they go to the ayahuasca. That's the kind of future that I see this going to, if it's to work. But if it's just to be allowed to everybody and their mother without, a mental health profile and clean drugs, and then also certain rituals like you had mentioned, I feel we're on a path to hell.
Sure, but a few things. The decriminalization is not open access to every. The only thing decriminalization of these medicines does is essentially, give a kick to the balls on the war on drugs. That's really all it's doing. It's just saying, like, it's not actually legalization would be actually the path to what you're talking about, as far as it having more negative consequences, because people will then actually have access to them, whereas decriminalization does not give access to anybody. It just means that, that kid smoking a joint on the street is not going to go to jail and have his life ruined over it, simply because he was born, the wrong race in the eyes of the law. So I'm actually very much in favor of decriminalization. We here just decriminalized everything and legalized psilocybin for therapeutic use. You had mentioned something also I'd like to get back to, which was that the lack of ritual in the West. I actually disagree with that. I wrote my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, is all about the various forms that entheogenic practices have taken from the ancient world, medieval world, up until, well, I stopped in pretty much the Victorian era. Um, so yeah, there's a pretty rich history of ritualization of entheogens in the West. What happened was,
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I'm familiar with your work and those studies, but I'd say the modern, the way it's being used in modern times, would you say that it's being used mass ritualistically, or it's
no, I would agree.
basically? Okay,
I would
gotcha.
agree with you that a lot of, I mean, I haven't read
Mhm.
too many other people's diaries, so I don't really know what they're doing with this stuff. As long as you're
Yeah.
just staying safe, I guess, and that's up for each person to determine the parameters of what they think safety is. So like a certain kind of person really can eat an eighth of mushrooms, go to, a festival or a concert and have a great time. I cannot do that. I cannot do that at all. So um it's but yeah, definitely I would agree with you, Mo. We're perhaps losing that ritual aspect of it. And I mean, at least not in my house, we're not. My partner and I are both pretty, keen on our rituals. We take our altars very seriously in this house. Yeah.
Yeah, so explain a little bit about the ritual process, maybe to those people that don't understand that. What is the purpose of it, and what does it do for you and your partner when you do partake in the mushrooms?
Well, what it does, especially for me, is show a reverence. So I guess a lot of it comes down to, do you believe that these plants and this fungi puts you in touch with a cosmic intelligence? If you don't think that, then, go have at it, do whatever you want to do. If you do believe that, which I do, then what all these rituals and things show, that what they're showing is that I'm honoring them and that I'm honoring their power and I'm honoring their knowledge and that cosmic and universal connection. I also do them because, just like if I wanted to write you a letter, and I know people don't really write letters anymore, but if I wanted to write you a letter, I would need to know your address, or otherwise that letter is not going to reach you. Well, so far as what I can tell from my experience with these different entities, mostly goddesses, is that they require certain addresses. And if you don't plug in those addresses, you're not going to get, to the place you want to go. So the prayer that I say to Gaia is different from the prayer that I say to Ikati, which is different from the prayer that I say to Kirke. Those are the three main goddesses of my magical system, or my witchy system, however people want to put it. So yeah, I was actually just talking to somebody who emailed me, and he's been trying to contact the Archangel Michael. Now, I don't have too much work or experience working with angels at all. Although it was odd because I've actually met angels in that sacred space. And it's one of the ways that you kind of know that it's real. I wouldn't have made that up because that sounds so cheesy. Oh, I was talking to angels. Like, oh my God, like grow up. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you wouldn't have made it up, what is it doing there? So I was helping him kind of find the address for the Archangel Michael, and now he seems like a relatively mentally, I shouldn't say relatively, seems like a very mentally healthy chap, just based on our email exchanges. Seems like a really good person, trying to make these connections for all the right reasons. So on that individual case, it's like, yeah, I'll sit with you and let's work this out. Let's find the address for the Archangel Michael, and he's going to put that ritual together, try to make that contact. And then, I told him, hey, please get back to me and let me know how it works out, and it's just, a lot of it has to do with listening also to the plants. We're all such chatty Cathys these days. We talk, talk, talk. We want everybody to know our opinions. And I mean, I'll eat my mushrooms and then I'll sit and I'll just listen to my Banisterius capi and chacruna leaves, because those are the two ingredients for ayahuasca, which I'm learning how to brew. My teacher is Gaia herself. I eat mushrooms and I go to class and she tells me what to do. And mostly what she's been saying is just shut your mouth and listen to what they're telling you, because they have sacred songs they need to teach you. Because if you're going to enter that space, you're going to want to know the sacred songs so that you can avoid any negative entities should they come your way. These songs are their songs of protection. So that's the way I'm doing it. Slowly but surely. As far as you had said before, maybe do ecstasy or or microdose before trying ayahuasca. Um, I understand the logic behind that, but they're ecstasy is not like ayahuasca at all. And if you have a very deep ecstasy experience, which is kind of difficult not to, ecstasy's pretty awesome, but that is not necessarily preparing you for ayahuasca at all.
Well,
Um,
I actually, my statement for that, sorry I didn't disclose it, would be say for that would be the road for maybe someone who was severely depressed and suicidal. Hey, that guy that might go straight to ayahuasca or a certain psychedelic, not
oh, I
having
see. I
not
see.
having a guide is going to go straight to maybe psychedelic hell, and
Sure.
all these negative entities could drag him down, to
Absolutely.
psychosis.
Sure, I misunderstood. So in that case, then
Sure.
I would agree with you. Starting off microdosing is fantastic for depression. I wrote a book about this, if anyone's interested, titled Microdosing Magic, a Psychedelic Spell Book. And it's just my kind of weird witchy ideas and mixing them with microdoses. But the secret to all this is that I don't actually microdose. I like if anyone out there that's listening has actually read that book, I use macrodoses for all that stuff.
Gotcha. So you're like along the lines of McKenna and taking 7 grams or 5 grams.
You know, I never know how much because like I'll start off like with maybe 4 or 5 grams for certain, or sometimes even just an eighth. And then while I'm in that space, a guy is like, I need you to eat more. And so I don't really, I haven't, I don't know. I'll just start eating them and I'll go deeper and she'll be like, okay, this is great, but I'm gonna need you to eat a little more. So I don't know how much I actually eat, you know.
Sure.
I don't use the amount of mushrooms that I've eaten as kind of like a badge of honor. Some people can kind of do that sometimes. Like, well, I've eaten 10 grams. Oh, well, I've eaten 20. I couldn't be less interested in how many grams of mushrooms you've eaten. If you ate 1 gram of mushrooms and you had a profound experience that helped bring you to a better place in life, well, all the better, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's just the American thing, hey, I took a bigger wave, surfing, I got a bigger
Yeah.
wave than you, or, I got a bigger fish, and right.
No, of course, but what the irony, Mo, you have to agree, is that it's like, oh, well, I took a bigger dose. That's why I achieved ego loss. It's like, wait, what?
True.
You're
Yeah.
bragging about having lost your ego? Like, do you hear how ridiculous that sounds?
Sure.
Yeah,
Well,
I
you can
don't
see
even
where.
try. Oh, sorry. I don't strive for ego. And that's something else I would say as far as advice to your listeners, at least my own opinion. Don't strive for ego loss. Strive for gnosis. Striving for ego loss, like, yeah, ego loss is cool and things like 5-MeO DMT will definitely get you there. But I have far more profound experiences when the ego is intact and I can heal it. And I can see where I'm doing something, dumb or where I'm being haphazard or just where I'm lacking in some way without, like, here's the deal. If you didn't have an ego, you would be as interesting to talk to as a rock. The
True.
ego is a necessary thing. Now, of course, having too inflated an ego can get you into trouble and can ruin relationships and, opportunities in life.
Yeah.
So, ego tempering is, I think, a better way to, approach these things. Ego loss, and the other thing is, yeah, with certain things, like especially with 5-MeO DMT, your ego is gone. But it's kind of like being in a swimming pool. Yeah, it's fun, but do you want to be in a swimming pool your whole life? No, you got shit to do. Like,
Sure.
go, experience the ego loss fine, and then get out there and integrate it and get to work.
Yeah, and I mean, if we could look at it, the people that don't have control of their egos, those are the people that are easily controlled, and they don't seek gnosis, and they go only one layer deep, and so forth. And then what I look at it as I get older, and especially when I take psychedelics and so forth, is that ego, it gets modified and changed. My personality, some I do deep introspective analysis, and sometimes I come out of it a different person, and often a better person from that. And
Yeah.
I agree. We definitely need our egos, and we need to maintain them, but also modify them. And I feel that through psychedelics, through ayahuasca, through cannabis, through different things, and then also through just philosophy and learning from life, that you could modify your ego, and your personality could change, and your ideas could change as you go forth. So
Like
Let's talk a little. Go ahead.
real quick, like how could it be possible to have a deep introspective analysis if you don't have an ego?
True.
It's impossible.
Yep. And I
So
just think a lot of people don't realize or understand the concept of ego and how it's been formed by themselves, their families, the culture, their own ideas that may be false and so forth, and it's something I think we all work on.
sure, I mean, and that plays into me myself too. Like, look, I have absolutely no idea what well, they don't have names there, but like the creatrix of the entire universe doesn't actually have a name, but I choose Gaia because I'm Greek and Italian, and that name makes sense to me. It just, Hecate, as I don't know, like the the energy of light doesn't really have a name, but she doesn't mind that I call her Ikati because that's what makes sense to me from my Greek heritage. So that's my own ego right there, like absolutely. But it's more about, and they don't care about that kind of stuff. There's so many, we get into so many things like these localized prejudices or prejudices, I should say, that don't actually exist in the spirit world. Like somebody once said to me, and then I promise we'll get into my research, but
That's okay. No, this
there's
is great.
there's the ayahuasca dieta, and for those unfamiliar, the dieta is just an entheogenic diet. You're supposed to abstain from meat, salt, sugar, sex, cannabis, and alcohol, and all that. And one of the reasons, because I asked about cannabis, because I smoked cannabis before doing ayahuasca, like, and it never had any effect and any negative effect whatsoever. And I was like, well, why? And this was, believe it or not, the answer that was given was, well, cannabis is a female spirit and ayahuasca is a female spirit. And I agree with that. They both are. And, women can be kind of catty. And it's like, oh my God, how sexist are you? Like, you really think that there's sexism in the spirit world? You really think that idea carries weight over there? That
Hmm.
ayahuasca is going to be like, oh, well, cannabis wore the same dress as me to the party. Like, what? Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I agree with you there, and I think it comes down to what I found in my experience. I've actually had bad trips when I was younger. I did my first LSD trip. I was 17 years old, had no idea what I was doing, and was into punk rock. I could say I definitely didn't have control of my body. I lacked all kinds of gnosis, and I was just basically thrown into the spirit world with other friends of mine, and we had good and bad trips. But man, what a wild ride it was for several years. But I could say it definitely taught me a lot and opened my mind. But my at first drug of choice as far as psychedelics was LSD, and then I found mushrooms. Thank God, because a lot of LSD during the time the '80s. I grew up here in Southern California. There's just a lot of dirty LSD being
Oh
pushed
yeah,
around.
New York was like that too. Are you familiar with Dr. Christopher Bache's book LSD and the Mind of the Universe?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with it.
Sure, cool.
So,
Excellent. Yeah, just to put it out there for your listeners, if you're interested in some really amazing medicine work done with LSD by a brilliant and wonderful and kind human being, check it out. It's the title LSD and the Mind of the Universe by Dr. Christopher Bache.
gotcha. Yeah, and I forget where I was gonna go with that.
I do that to people. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, that's okay. It's hard when I have questions and then I'll get sidetracked on another thought, and maybe a personal experience, and then you got to try to remember what you're talking about. So,
Sure.
doing podcast and actually being a guest, it's not the easiest thing, and I actually enjoy the podcast because we're just kind of free flowing
Oh yeah.
around everything. Let's talk a little bit about the subject you just brought up, the mind of the universe. That's something that's interested me lately, and fungi is something that I keep coming across. Not only is it beneficial in the sense that the psilocybin mushroom could put us in touch with these spirits, and also open our mind and our spirits, and help our personalities and our egos and heal us and so forth. They also can be parasitic to us in a different sense, where people can develop these fungal infections. And I find out often why they're developing these fungal infections, because they're not living how Gaia would want them to live, right? We could say, in the Christian sense, we could say that they're being sinners,
Sure.
and their sins are coming back on them in the form of disease, and some of them are losing their mind. And what's interesting is, I'm finding out that some of these fungal infections seem to derive in the GI tract. And what's interesting, of course, when we take psilocybin mushrooms, we're swallowing it, and it's basically being processed in our GI tract, the same GI tract that they're calling our second brain, right? So we take this psilocybin mushroom, and we enter into this world, into this different channel, that we could say this mind, or this other dimension that the fungi and the spirits kind of inhabit, where we're able to be who we are still, and see who we are, but also interact with them, good and bad entities. But what I'm finding, these people that aren't balanced, that are going to the sin world, that don't understand this gnosis, Tom, that don't get everything that we're talking about, they seem to be taken over by these fungal infections that almost act parasitic. And then in the form of meth addicts, which my research has went into, because I have a son right now who's addicted to meth, and then I have other loved ones that have had problems all their life. I've had people that are lost, and I feel I'll never be able to help, because they seem to be gone, as if someone else has taken over their body.
Sure.
And what I've come to the conclusion was that these people, their spirits almost have left their body, and they're basically almost like automatons,
Zombies.
to zombies, to self-destruction. They grew up just like us, Tom. They, we're babies. I believe, like you, that we're looked at it as our heart and our intent, and it's not really if you're gay, black, white, your skin color, your religion, nothing like that. It's your intent and who you are, and the true heart on the inside.
Yeah, it's a shame that philosophy is kind of going out the window in our country, though. It seems like your immutable characteristics are now the only thing that matters about you,
True.
and I find that to be just an absolute shame. Maybe we're growing out of it a little bit. I hope we do. Like, your immutable characteristics are actually the least interesting thing about you.
I agree.
So
I agree. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people out there that would disagree, of course, with us, but
that's
that's why.
fine. They're wrong. They're just
Yeah,
wrong. They
yeah,
just have
they're
not
wrong.
achieved gnosis.
I agree.
Anybody that thinks immutable characteristics matter, again, they're not to be ridiculed or hated. They're to be pitied,
Sure.
because they have not achieved gnosis. Like, what a ridiculous idea to think that you can sum someone up by their skin color. What the fuck? What are you talking about? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah,
It's insanity, and I feel more, I feel bad for them.
sure. And these people, I do as well. Where I have, of course, a son, where I experienced a change in his character, and that's what I want to talk about, Tom, is your thoughts on this, because this is probably something you're not used to, but you have the change, the mutable change in the ego that you could do with psilocybin, and you could come in contact, and you could do these rituals and have gnosis and understand where you're going to, where a lot of these people that delve into some of these drugs, such as meth. There's actually a story of a guy that had a meth and psychiatric problem, and he heard about mushrooms and how it cures psychiatric problems. You know what he did? He injected the mushrooms, and
Oh
then
yes, that's recently. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And again, I don't know if it's misinformation, but
Sure
the
it is.
mushrooms started. They said the fungi started growing within his blood. Is that possible?
I don't know. I saw that like on Facebook. I'm a member in all these different psychedelic groups, because that's pretty much all I use Facebook for, is to just connect with like other medicine workers and healers and
Hmm.
educators and stuff within the psychedelic realm. I didn't read the article. I don't really trust anything from the media at all. Like 100% of it, I think, is bullshit. And somebody in one of the rooms said that the title was very misleading and that's not what actually happened. But again, I can't comment. I didn't read the article. I'm ignorant of what it says. And I am not a physician, so I don't know if fungi can grow in your veins or not. I mean, I never heard of that. But you know, I don't know. I really have no
Sure.
idea about that.
Well, yeah, and long story short, my research into the pathogenic side of mushrooms was because of an experience I had with my son. We were in a house that had a lot of mold growing within the walls, not psilocybin mushrooms. We're
Oh,
talking, Stachybotrys and Aspergillus, and these have been known to cause cancer and death in humans. And I didn't know it at the time, and so forth. But he ended up getting sick. It got into his central nervous system, and he couldn't walk. He was losing his mind. We ended up getting him 76 hyperbaric treatments in New Mexico. Had to move out of California. So that started my deep dive into the research and toxic mold and more of the pathogenic side of it. I had, of course, the experience of taking it, the Amanita muscaria and, the psilocybin, but not on the pathogenic side. And so I started learning about that. And then, of course, trying to understand what was happening with my son, and then realizing that there's two sides to fungi. There's
oh
the
yeah.
there's the plugging in with the psilocybin, the Amanita muscaria, and then there's the mushrooms that if you pick the wrong mushroom, you're going to be dead, if you eat it. And then also the mold within your house can possibly kill you. So what's interesting to me is where I'm getting at is that there's different channels.
Hmm.
Different channels, bro. there's
Yeah,
there's
it's a big
different
universe.
there's different filaments around us. Some are seeking, good, and to give us good information, and then some are seeking to fucking eat our asses.
Of course, because
Right?
once again, the universe is both loneliness and despair, and also love and light. You
Yeah.
know, and these are just microcosms, like reflections of that macro. They're microcosmic reflections of the macro. So as above, so below,
Yeah. Or so below as above as well,
or
right?
so below as very
Yeah.
exactly.
As within, so without.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but what I did find, I'm not a medical doctor, is that, yeah, the mold can grow, these toxic molds within your organs, and they can disseminate. They're finding, for example, people that are losing their consciousness as they get old, i.e., dementia and Alzheimer's, are having fungus growing within their brains. Um,
Really, that's interesting because uh, people are using microdosing psilocybin to actually stave off
yeah.
Alzheimer's.
So here, where I'm
So,
getting at, Tom, keep in mind, I'm not, I'm all for for psilocybin mushrooms and Amanita muscaria. I
oh,
believe not 100, I believe 100% that if you're right and you take mushrooms and you're healthy, that you're not going to get a fungal infection, and that it'll lead to that.
oh
So
yeah.
that's where I was kind of getting is, what's your theories? What's happening when we're tapping into this mind, whatever you want to call it, when we take this mushroom and take it into the GI tract? And then also think about, as you're telling me this, these other people that might have a pathogenic thing that they did not want growing within them, controlling them.
Sure. Well, I mean, again, great question, and we're both not medical doctors. To everybody listening, um, I mean, it sounds again, and I didn't read the article about the psilocybin one. Now, molds coming in and destroying your body, yeah, that absolutely, black mold will kill you over time. No doubt about that. And there's no reason, again, that I could think of why they wouldn't grow inside you, but uh, it's kind of difficult really for me to answer that because again, like I am not keen on the science behind any of this. So
Sure.
everything that I would say would be out of complete ignorance. So I just want to, preface, your listeners with that. Everything I'm about to say is coming from someone who has no idea what I'm talking
Okay.
about. I think that these are just those. It's like they're tools like anything else, and you can use a hammer to build a birdhouse, or you could use a hammer to clock somebody over the head. And if you're injecting yourself with psilocybin, that's closer to probably clocking yourself in the head with a hammer than if you just eat them. Um, like I've never heard of somebody eating psilocybin mushrooms and having, growing fungus inside them. And humans have been eating psilocybin mushrooms for thousands of years. I think we would have heard about that by now.
Yeah, and I've never heard of that as well, and I've researched
Yeah.
pretty deep. So
Yeah, mushrooms are pretty natural. They're actually relatively safe. Um, even though it feels like your body is like going through some, some pretty intense stuff, it's actually not. I mean, if you were, your body goes through more stress if you were to run around your block 3 or 4 or 5 times than it's going to do on 5 grams of mushrooms, you know. Um, but as far as, the molds and things growing inside, I have no idea. I really don't. I don't even have a thought about it.
Yeah, sure, and that's fine, and you don't have to go in that realm. Again, that was kind of my own personal research, and it made me think of the mind of the universe, and that's why I had thought about it. So you would be on the psilocybin playful side of it, and love thy neighbor, where there's other people that I believe are in the dark sides of it, unknowingly being taken over by the same mind of the universe that you're talking
Oh,
about.
oh, absolutely. Well, we do live in a dualistic universe.
Hmm.
I think beyond that, though, it's weird. So when you partake with 5-MeO DMT, you actually break through that duality. And it's weird, like, oh, there's so many dimensions, and it's like, how do we account for this? But I like to think of it as there is a bedrock of non-duality behind everything. What the ancient Greek Gnostics would call the pleroma, which is the fullness, which is just everything, and we can't understand that any more than my kitty cat can understand the rules of hockey. It's just it's closed off to us. When you were talking, I think I misunderstood. With the fungus like growing inside in a bad way, did you mean that more like metaphorically, like taking over the person, or did you mean like literally like moss growing inside a person?
Both.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I'll
And I'm
comment on.
actually, I have, I have proof that it does do both.
Sure. Oh, and again, yeah, you can look. There are some really evil shamans in the Peruvian, like ayahuasqueros in the Peruvian forest, giving ayahuasca to people and then raping and murdering them.
Wow.
So that happens. That certainly exists. Um, but and that's just a darkness within that person.
Sure.
I think, in my opinion, and that comes from, again, a lack of gnosis. I mean, I don't care if you studied with ayahuasqueros in Peru for 10 years. If you have not achieved gnosis, then I'm not interested in you facilitating the I mean, I facilitate all my own medicine. I don't like group participation, like medicine ceremonies at all. um, I actively avoid them. So I just do all the work myself. But again, I have a connection to these things that I implicitly trust them, and I implicitly trust their wisdom and what they care to bestow. So I don't actually need somebody, blowing smoke in my face and, chanting at me when I'm trying to get deeper and, be closer to that medicine. It's like, well, if you're yapping in my ear the whole time, like, how am I supposed to like focus in on what guy is trying to tell me? So I don't really go for the group ceremony thing. I don't know how I got onto that, but oh, that there were you always have bad players out there. I mean,
Yeah.
there were 5-MeO facilitators that in America that have robbed people, that have abused people. I've seen some guy kick people under the like he was the facilitator. I mean, he's literally kicking these people, like kicking them while they're in that space. And you know, that's not something that I would recommend to anybody, but the people that go to see this particular facilitator know what they're getting into and they want that. That's the experience they desire. Now, getting back to your question, because I completely went on a tangent here, um, sitting on that bedrock of what I like call the pleroma, or rather what the ancient Greeks called the pleroma that I've adopted. After that, you do have that duality of the universe. There's a lot of stars out there. There's also a lot of black holes out there. And so, you have to, not every dimension works the way ours does. And I think that's one of the things that'll get you into trouble, kind of like saying something so ridiculously sexist, like, mixing cannabis with ayahuasca is not good because they're both female they're female spirits and they're going to get catty, which is just like, how human, like what a
Hmm.
terribly sexist, human, ridiculous thing to say.
Hmm.
But I think that can already infect the dark. You're charging up the darkness with that kind of mentality. You're charging up the loneliness. You're charging up the black holes instead of the shining stars.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, again, the Christian sense. I grew up Christian, and some people listening, this again is a Gnostic podcast, but you can't enter the kingdom of heaven if you're not like a child, and it reminds me of like your work when I look at you and you're kind of having fun with your mushrooms and in the mushroom house, the pictures of that. You're being a kid and having fun and not worrying about everybody else. It's just like, this is my world, my ideas, and I like that, and I feel that um, that's the way we need to be. Unfortunately, sometimes our egos get in the way of that. But let's get into some of the research before it gets too late. I wanted to talk about the holy mushroom theory,
Sure.
and also the Christian radish. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then also uh, tie in your critique of Yanni Irving's work, who I'm sure you're going to mention a little bit as you do that.
I mean, truth be told, he's not even worth mentioning. But if we get into that, sure.
Okay.
So the holy mushroom, like I just yeah. So the holy mushroom hypothesis is this idea that there was a mushroom at the root and start of Christianity that over the centuries was covered up and suppressed by this elite group of power hungry priests who wanted all of that entheogenic knowledge and cosmic wisdom for themselves. That is absolute nonsense. Um, First and foremost, as I document in my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, Christians did not cover up their entheogenic practices. We have this idea in this country, I don't know where it came from, but that Christians are against these entheogenic experiences. And maybe today they are, but historically they weren't. Oregon was one of the first major church father, Christian apologist, was all about taking drafts of mandrake and entering the Godhead. Augustine of Hippo ate mandrake. He didn't like it, but he tried it. Um, Thomas of Persane talks about using this stuff. There was a bishop, a Syrian bishop, living in the fifth, either the fourth or fifth century. I believe the fifth, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, it was a Syrian bishop named Theodoret, living sometime around the fourth or fifth century, who said, "Hey, I like to smoke opium and read from the Gospels because I get this insight from it." This is not a suppression of using substances, my friends. This is an open acknowledgement that they do have benefits. Now, I think a lot of people don't realize this because they can't read the languages that a lot of these accounts are written in. As just one example, in around 1160, we have this anonymous treatise called the Trubter Hohelied, which just translates from German to the Trudpert Song of Songs. And in this treatise, this author, whoever she was, writes about using mandrake in ways and is just drowning this experience in entheogenic Christian symbolism. And it's like you read this and you're like, this is not a cover-up of entheogens. This is an open acknowledgement of how breathtaking they are. Thomas of Persane actually had a word for this. They obviously didn't call it entheogen. Thomas of Persane called it the good sleep of the eternal. But when you read his accounts of it, he's talking about an entheogenic experience. There was an Orthodox Russian priest named Macarius who would light up cannabis before his congregations and then read the Gospels and take them on that Sunday Mass kind of trip while they're all high on cannabis.
Sounds like my kind of church.
Yeah, right. That
Yeah.
sounds like a good time. So it's
Yeah.
like what I'm getting at and where this ties into the holy mushroom, it's like, so in order to believe the holy mushroom, you'd have to believe that Christian authors and church fathers and various Christian authorities wrote openly about cannabis, wrote openly about mandrake, wrote openly about opium. Oh, but no, we have to cover up the mushroom. No, no, that makes no sense historically. Um, the fact that there's no written, text at all talking about the holy mushroom. Nobody ever said like, oh wow, there's a mushroom in Christianity, like that never happened once, and that's where people get into the whole, well, it was covered up. You cannot cover something up like that for 2,000 years. That is just a very naive assumption as to how history works. How long did Watergate last? And that was the fucking president. I mean, really, conspiracies do not actually work out over time. I mean, and even when there are conspiracies, let's say, for example, the Gulf of Tonkin, that was a conspiracy. Absolutely. We now all know about it. For your listeners who might not be familiar, the Gulf of Tonkin was essentially the American government lied about the Vietnamese attacking us in the Gulf of Tonkin, and that never happened, and we know that they lied. Now, this is a lie at the highest levels of government, and yet any historian, anybody that's studied 20th century American history, knows that that was a total American conspiracy, like a real one that actually happened. So these things don't tend to last that long, and they certainly don't last for 2,000 years. On top of which, the people um, like our like Jan Irvin, for example, who support, or I don't know if he still supports it or not, but when he did support it, it's like, look, that he's just a computer repairman, for lack. He's not a scholar. I mean, and if you've read his book, like, forget Latin, forget, Old Church Slavonic, that dude could barely handle the English language. So you're going to take that guy's advice? Like, really? Um, so it's just, there's just a painful lack of evidence for it. And there's just no reason to believe that, or there's now the idea, it grew into the idea that there are mushrooms in Christian art. Every single one of those, to anybody that studied Christian art history, knows exactly what we're looking at. The trees that tend to have a kind of mushroom shape to them are not based on a mushroom. They're based off the parasol of victory, which is an Assyrian invention back in the day, which, it's a desert. It's really hot out there. The parasol of victory was a way of showing dominance over a conquered peoples. Now, when Christians took over, they adopted that parasol of victory to show Christ's victory over the world. And we have linguistic evidence for that, down to, I can't pronounce the word, but in Assyrian, and again, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it, but the root word for umbrella means something like shady tree. So if they were really basing it off the mushroom, they would have called it something like little mushroom, but they didn't. They based it off their word for shady tree. The Romans did the same thing. They called them umbrellicum, which we get the word umbrella from that word. So when we see these images, and I have a debate against one of these holy mushroom advocates, where I go over, I show the images and show pictures and show how these images evolved over time. I don't know if we have time to do that now, but I could probably pull some of them up and just show you like how this actually formed, but we probably don't have time for it. I also have a book coming out in probably a year and a half, 2 years, that's called The Mushroom Heretic and the Search for the Psychedelic Christ, in which I lay all of this out and I show,
I like that name. That's a good name.
Thank you. Yeah, I am the mushroom heretic because I'm the person within the psychedelic renaissance that doesn't buy any of this mushroom Jesus nonsense. And it is nonsense. And now that's not to say that a person can't eat mushrooms now and have a Jesus experience. I hope you do.
Sure.
But it is to say that certain people, here's, I talked about ego before. Here's where ego can get you into trouble. I was in a room, one of those, psychedelic discussion rooms on Facebook, and somebody brought up this holy mushroom, BS. And I laid out and I said, oh no, it's not based off the mushroom. It's based off the parasol of victory. And this very unenlightened person's response was, oh yeah, because I've had so many mind-blowing experiences eating umbrellas. It's like, history has nothing to do with you, pal. Your ego plays no role in what historical evidence says. Of course, no one has ever eaten an umbrella and had an enlightening experience. That's ridiculous. But what he was doing was he was saying, well, since I've eaten mushrooms and I've been enlightened by them, which is debatable in my opinion,
Mhm.
and I've never eaten an umbrella and been enlightened by it, therefore there are mushrooms in Christian art, which is just the most ridiculous and ego-driven, self-centered thing a person can say. History, if we want to get into research, into my research now, let me just say real quick,
Sure.
history does not care about your preferences, your feelings, or your hopes. Just doesn't care. There's the evidence and what the evidence says, and then there's the nonsense that you can Google. And they're two very different things.
Definitely. So you're basically, I know when I look over your research and the articles, you're basically your course questioning the holy mushroom theory, and you compare the colors and the different things to the mushrooms, which I agree with, and you make up good points, and I agree with your points, but your theory now is that it's basically the umbrella, basically, but you're not certain. Some of the pictures, they kind of look like mushrooms, but just not the amanita mushroom, right? But you're
No,
kind of,
now I'm so when I wrote those articles many years ago.
yeah,
Now
exactly.
I'm pretty, in history it's very difficult to be certain about anything, but I'm as sure as a person can be that that shape of that tree that everybody they called it the pills bomb, the mushroom tree. That's their made up word for it. Which is interesting because they don't even realize that there's already a name for that. That's again, all these holy mushroom people, I'm sorry to say, they are not educated in medieval Christian history, ancient Christian history. Like they don't know what they're talking about. These things already have names. It's called a paradisi bomb, a paradise tree, not a pilsen bomb, which is a mushroom tree. Um, so
Yeah,
again,
let's go to that, because that's interesting you say that. I wanted to bring up a quote from the British Library. According to the British Library, they represent two trees. On their website, it says it resembles later 11th century Norman and Northern French manuscript illuminations in its style, and also in the symbolism incorporated into it. The two trees on either side of the cross represent the two trees of paradise, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, referring to the fall of mankind, from which the crucifixion was supposed to attain salvation. So this is in regards to the Arundel Psalter image,
sure.
that one. So yeah, so that goes. What's interesting though is they're finding, through science, Tom, and I want to kind of open your mind to a little theory. You're way more of an expert than I am. Again, I'm kind of going into the fungi realm, looking at both the pathogenic side, which I sometimes call the demonic fungi, and then also the heavenly fungi, right? The Amanita muscaria that really takes us to a different realm and opens up our spirit, I believe. Um, so basically, what I'm trying to say is that, what if those are mushrooms, but not amanita, and they're relating to us and where we descend? Because science is now saying, again, we could question this, that we descend from fungi, and from fungi came the sponge, and so
Sure.
forth.
Well,
So
that's
when,
oh sorry.
yeah, so when I look at that, and then also, Tom, or they say that our bodies, 97% of our bodies are basically foreign DNA and matter, which would include some of these fungi and other things around us as well. So possibly they were trying to still relate, but not in the way that, the holy mushroom. I'm just kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah, sure. So, one thing with that is that to say that it's not the Amanita muscaria but a different mushroom is moving the goalpost.
Okay, thank
Because
you. Thank you,
the
bro.
whole
All right.
the whole reason people started looking for mushrooms in Christian art was because when John Marco Allegro published The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross in 1970, he put one, and it's like a very famous picture of the plain coral fresco in his book. Now, he doesn't say much about it, and believe it or not, John Marco Allegro, for anybody familiar with him, towards the end of his life, he didn't believe a word of any of this stuff. I would encourage you, if you think he did, to read his daughter's biography on him called John Marco Allegro, The Maverick of the Dead Sea Scrolls, where she says clear as day that he stopped believing all this stuff in the last few years of his life. He thought it was complete BS. So John Marco Allegro never himself anticipated that conspiracy theorists and amateurs were going to go looking through Christian art for images of mushrooms. This is just how these kind of paradigms and how misinformation forms over time. So the only reason people are looking for mushrooms in art is because Allegro, his entire book, is not about mushrooms in art, it's about mushrooms in language. But he made up, I don't know if you've read The Sacred Mushroom in the Cross, but he invented half the vocabulary that he was using to say that there's mushroom vocabulary. And wow, I got to tell you, Mo, I too could make up whatever nonsense in history I want if I get to make up words, which is what he did. And that's why his entire theory was rejected. There was a very good reason to reject his idea, because if you're just going to make everything up, like, well, anybody can do that. So everybody started looking for mushrooms, for the Amanita muscaria specifically in Christian art, because Allegro said, well, there's Amanita muscaria in Christian language, which of course has been debunked 100 times over at this point. And then when they found, okay, there are no Amanita muscaria in the art, oh, well, no, let's say there's psilocybin, then, oh, let's say this, which is kind of what I mean by, well, now you're just moving the goalpost. The whole reason people are looking for this is because, again, you picture you're standing on this thing that you think is this platform of sound scholarship that says there's mushrooms in Christian texts in the New Testament. But as soon as that crumbles, which it easily does to anybody that studies language, the entire premise comes down with it. And so instead of going down with it, people are just trying to reach out to another brand. Oh, they're not Amanita muscaria, they're psilocybin.
So that wasn't actually complimenting me. You were, as far as moving the bar, you're like, dude, you need to step in your lane, right? Kind of.
Not so. No, not that. Look, we can certainly talk about these things, but yeah, I don't mean it raising the bar. I mean moving the goalpost. And gotcha. It's kind of like I also can throw a dart on a wall and wherever it lands, paint the bullseye in around it, but which is what the entire holy mushroom theory is. But it's like, but how honest is that really?
Mm-hmm. True. All right, let's
can I say one last thing, because people are going to wonder about this.
Of course.
I mentioned the plain Coralt fresco. The plain Coralt fresco, people say it looks like, are you familiar with what I'm talking about when I say plain Coralt fresco?
No, I don't think so.
I've got Allegro's book like right here somewhere. Here we go. Ugh. That's I don't know if you can see
yes.
this one. Yeah, this one, very famous one. Now, a lot of people say this looks like an Amanita muscaria. However, have you ever seen an Amanita muscaria that has other mushrooms growing out the side of it? Have you ever seen an Amanita muscaria that has 3 branches holding up the canopy top? Again, the reason that has a mushroom shape at the top, not based on a mushroom, based on the parasol of victory. Now, someone will point out, I'll put it a little closer so your audience can see, that there are white dots on there. And of course, Amanita muscaria, as we all know, we can see with this big one back here, that they do have white dots. Those are not the dots of an Amanita muscaria. Those are communion wafers. This image is actually showing a play, a mystery play from the 13th century called The Mystery of the Paradise Tree. That's what I was talking about, the Paradisibum. So unless you know that, yeah, of course that looks like a mushroom. I thought it was a mushroom when I first saw it, but we do this thing, and this is where our anachronisms get the best of us. We see the canopy top and we see the spots, so we assume, okay, well, Amanita muscaria has a canopy top and spots, but those two things, the canopy top and the spots, actually have 2 distinct lines of history that brought them together. The parasol of victory and the mystery play of putting communion wafers on this tree. We actually get the we hang. I'll get even deeper into this. So here's something else to consider. This play was a play about the fall of Eve and Adam and the rise of and the birth of Jesus. If you can't read medieval texts written in Latin or vulgar Italian or vulgar Spanish or vulgar French or vulgar German, you're not going to know that. Okay, so part of this play was performed every year on a very specific date. the feast day of Eve and Adam, which was December 24th. And what's December 25th? That's when Jesus is born. So the whole point of this was that you would put communion wafers on the tree to show that Jesus is coming and taking over the sin from the fall. That's what those spots are. That's why it has the canopy top. Sorry, my friends, it's not a mushroom.
Do you have a write-up on that on your website, or is that in your book? Or
I'm actually working on that chapter right now.
yeah, that's an interesting. I like that concept there. So that to me
Well, because
explains it
it's
more.
historically accurate. I
Yeah.
mean,
So
that's how history's done. It's not done by Google image searching and saying, "Oh wow, that looks like a mushroom, and I've eaten mushrooms, so it must be true." That's ego, and that's an unhealthy ego. Real history is done by trying to prove yourself wrong over and over and over again until you get as close as you can to the truth. History works in probabilities, and I'll be the first to tell you that. I know for certain that those white spots represent the communion wafers. Well, not exactly. Of course, I would never claim to know anything 100% with history, but all of the evidence makes it seem more probable. I want to point one last thing out. The flecks of a mushroom are formed from what's known as the universal veil, or the cosmic egg that forms, and as the mushroom comes out, it pulls away, and those spots are the remnants. As you could see here, there is no cosmic egg down here. So those spots can't be Amanita spots. It's impossible because the very thing that they grow out of is not present at the bottom of the mushroom where it should be.
and I know you've been studying this a long time to
20
come to.
years.
Yeah, gotcha.
20 years.
I'm
So
sure
if anybody has wants to challenge me on that, bring it.
definitely, and I'm sure.
I will pull out the medieval texts that talk about this for you, and we'll translate them together.
And I'm sure daily you get these challenges or people in the groups and so forth all over the internet.
Yeah, it's yeah, I do.
So
Look, I wish it were a mushroom. I wish it were a mushroom. That'd be so cool. This is the other thing. I got one last thing I just have to say real quick. I'm so sorry.
sure.
As a psychedelic historian, I have every reason in the world to want to say that that's a mushroom. You know how much grant money I could get if those were actually mushrooms? Okay,
Yeah.
like seriously. Like,
So did it start with you like looking at it and go, wait, that's not an
no,
Amanita? Is that kind of how
no,
it was for you, or no? How was it?
no. So this is how it started. I actually used to believe the holy mushroom. When I first encountered it in my late teens and early 20s, I believed it. I was a little bit younger and still, just starting off my path into, the psychedelic studies. And my whole thing was, I believed all of it, but I didn't think anyone had written a good enough book to prove it. So I actually set out to prove the holy mushroom theory true. I set out to prove that that was an Amanita muscaria. And the more I looked into it and the more I did my research, I couldn't justify it. And again, here's where you have to kind of keep your ego in check. Was I going to just do what, let's say, Jan Irvin does, which is the mental gymnastics to make his preconceived ideas fit? Or was I going to admit, you know what? I was wrong. Oh no, we're not allowed to say we're wrong anymore. Everybody has to be right all the time, don't we?
Now that's interesting. So you went out on a journey to prove it was right and write a better book, and then as you're doing the research, you actually proved it was wrong, and your own ethics and morality was like, I can't, write
Yeah.
this book and go along with what's essentially what you believe is either a lie, misinformation, because
Well,
anybody with intelligence, once they look into it, will know that, right?
yeah, it's misinformation, and the truth is, with my knowledge of language, I could totally write a book, a bestseller on that, because these books do great. They fly off the bookshelves at bookstores. I could easily, if I wanted to, just totally lie to all of you and say, oh yeah, this text says, oh yeah, it says mushroom here, and totally butcher the language and misrepresent it. I could do that, but I'm not, because I'm not gonna, because I'm honest, and I
That's great.
change my mind when I'm wrong, and maybe our mutual acquaintance Jan Irvin could learn that lesson to just change his mind because he's wrong.
I doubt that's going to happen.
Definitely not going to happen. The poor guy just has never achieved gnosis, and it's a shame.
Definitely. Well, he's changed the name of his website to something else, but that's another story. And
Yeah.
let's talk about just a few more questions before we wrap it up here. Do you believe that we are in the midst of a psychedelic renaissance right now?
Oh, it's undeniable. I mean, we like us, you know, we the better research is coming out. Chris Bennett, a very good friend and colleague of mine, just published 2 years ago a book called Liber 420, which is absolutely brilliant. It shows all the ways cannabis has been used in magic and spirituality in the ancient world and medieval world and the Renaissance period, and how Renaissance magicians and ceremonial magicians were using all this stuff. Um, there's there's great work being done with another friend and colleague of mine, Ben Sessa, over in Bristol in the UK with MDMA for therapy. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, is that what the acronym stands for? I forget. Anyway, MAPS is doing great work out there. I think cannabis is being legalized and decriminalized all over the country and in certain parts of the world. I think was it Thailand that just recently got rid of their pretty strict law? I don't know. I don't recall, so don't quote me on that.
Because
But
they've had some of the strictest laws in Thailand, right?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I've never been there, so I don't want to comment on that because I'm not sure. There are more psychedelics conferences happening. There's several a year now, and it used to be, something that was an every now and then kind of thing. They're all being well attended. My partner and I throw our own psychedelic conference, the Guy in Mind Psychedelic Conference. Um, yeah, I think that there's absolutely we are living in a say. That's one of the reasons I wouldn't want to be alive anywhere else or at any other time is because we are in the thick of the psychedelic renaissance.
and it's interesting just to retouch on what I talked about before. This is happening almost concurrently as it appears, on YouTube and different things. People are being deplatformed and censored, but it seems to be this political type of thing where the psychedelics are somewhat being left out of that, which is great because, the last thing I want to see are people like you deplatformed or censored over the knowledge you're disseminating on the mushrooms and so forth. So I feel that we're having that censorship, and maybe it's just certain political things that are happening. What are your thoughts there? It's like it's free realm for the Renaissance and for witches and whatever on Gnostics, and then when you get into a certain realm and the politics or whatever and media, you're censored. I don't live in that world per se, but I've dealt in it a little bit, so I see kind of what's happening. Do you see that as well happening? You hear about all this censorship and deplatforming, and at the same time, a renaissance of psychedelics is happening.
Oh yeah, I mean I haven't seen too many people like who's being deplatformed in the psychedelic renaissance.
No, no one in that realm,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah,
Sure.
it's mainly to deal with politics and media. If you kind of
That's outside
change,
of my realm. I don't like I again I've taken mushrooms too many times to be fooled by the media. It's just uh, although Facebook did try to censor me, I gave a talk a few weeks ago, and actually almost a month ago in December. Whereas I'm sure you've heard of the whole like there's that supposed connection between Santa Claus and Christmas traditions and the Amanita muscaria mushroom.
sure,
Yeah, none of that's true either. It's just the latest outgrowth of the holy mushroom hypothesis or conspiracy theories. That's what it is. Although that's not part of the conspiracy, but it's just an outgrowth of that. And I advertised that on Facebook that hey, I'm giving this talk, and I got a notification saying, oh, you can't be doing this, blah blah blah. And so I challenged it because they give you the opportunity to say if you think there's an error, I said, yeah, I see advertisements for talks on psychedelic. Like, what are you talking about all the time? Um, I mean, really, the only people that have actually tried to deplatform me have been leftists. That's it, you know.
sure.
So,
Did they reinstate the video or allow you to do it, or?
oh, I mean, it was just an advertisement. So yeah, they got they whatever bot they have working for them, going back and saying, okay, yeah, fine. This is all over the place. I mean, on top of which, that entire talk was about where psychedelics aren't in history, not where they are in history. So it's like, I'm actually like, you're not even charging me with the right offense here, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as far as I haven't felt stifled politically, and I have a really big mouth anyway, so it's, I haven't felt that. The only people that have tried to deplatform me have been very angry and unenlightened leftists. But of course it failed because they're so ridiculous and their accusations are just nonsensical. So it pretty much just, it fell right on its face.
Sure. Yeah. So you don't play the political left or the right game, deal with any of that.
I mean, it's impossible to not have political perspectives. I don't
Sure.
like extremism in any form. I'll just put it that way. There are, I look at, are you, these are the only three things I care about: how you treat people, how you treat animals, and how you treat the planet. Other than that, I don't care what your thoughts are, what your politics are. I just care how you treat people. And again, a lot of these people circle back to what I was saying when we first started this conversation. They're just acting out these dramas because they have not achieved gnosis. So they're still pretty unenlightened, which is also proof that, eating mushrooms doesn't necessarily lead to enlightenment, or eating LSD. I mean, it doesn't lead to enlightenment. I have friends that would call themselves conservative who are really good people, and I have friends that are liberals who are really good people. And they're not good because they're conservative or liberal. They're good because they're just decent humans, And I've encountered, right-wing Nazis, and I've encountered the kinds of left-wing Nazis that were trying to deplatform me. And again, to me, they're just the two sides of the same coin. It's Rush Limbaugh and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's the right-wing Nazis. It's the left-wing Nazis. It's the people that stormed the Capitol over bullshit that doesn't exist. And it's the shrieking crybaby leftists who, try to deplatform people over their own misguided simulations. So,
It's
and I'm not,
a virtual shit show.
it is, it is a,
Yeah.
it is a virtue signaling shit show sometimes as
There
well.
you go.
Um,
There you go. I like that.
Yeah, and and that's what a lot of this stuff is about. It's too much about defining who an enemy is, just so that you don't have to improve yourself. Oh, I don't have to do it. Look, that's the bad guy over there, so I don't have to do any work. I don't have to sit with mushrooms and dig into my shadow and do any shadow work, because look, there's the bad guy. It's not me.
This is a great
And
way to end it, because that's what's being agnostic is all about. It's about working on yourself. And I believe that if we each work on ourselves and through our families or through our partners and our own families under our houses, we could change the world, and we got to be a better person, treat people how we want to be treated. And, I like how you say it. It's how a person treats other people, how they treat other animals, and how they treat the earth. I think that's a good way to judge a person's character.
Yeah, and if somebody is mean to animals or mean to people or pollutes, just stay away from that person, because that's not going to be good for you. And hopefully that person will one day have an enlightening experience. And oh, it's so hard because again, we are living in such a solipsistic time. Can these people actually have that breakthrough? I don't know.
Let's hope so, right?
I hope so. I truly do. And I know I
Definitely.
got a little aggressive talking when we got into the history portion. I just want to apologize for that a little bit. It's
That's
just
okay.
for
I
me,
look at it as passion. Yeah, passion, Tom.
psychedelic history is as sacred as the plants are themselves, at least in my opinion. And so I tend to get a little passionate about it.
Yeah,
If
and this
if you
is
want to believe there are mushrooms in Christian art, go ahead. You're just wrong about that, or at least you're probably wrong, because history works in probabilities, not your ego.
definitely. And I think your research paper, when you do come out with that, will help a lot of these people as well, because the explanation you gave to me on that image definitely made me see your angle there, because I didn't know about that history. All of us don't have the time to go there, but you have lived this for, as you'd said, for several decades now. So the audience, I'm sure there's people out there that want to find out more about what you're doing, Tom, maybe buy a book and be involved in your groups. Can you please direct them?
Absolutely. Or if you want to send me hate mail, that's fine. I don't care. Um, so you can reach me at psychedelichistorian.com. That's my personal webpage. I'm also on in Instagram, Psychedelic Historian, and there's something else I'd like to plug really quick. My psychedelics organization, Sanctum Psychedelia, is currently building the largest repository of digitized psychedelic literature on the planet. That can be found at sanctum.org. That's PSANCTUM.org. We have some articles up there as well. And yeah, go check out the library. In my 20 years of studying this stuff, I've collected thousands of research papers stemming all the way back from the 1800s and Westerners' first encounters with peyote and, writing medical, articles about it, all the way to, the CIA. I have a whole bunch of MK Ultra documents that are on there, and there's so many more. But that's the thing that we're working on most right now, is building that. We also have the Sanctum Oddcast, which is our podcast, because everybody, you have to have a podcast these days.
Definitely.
Yeah, you don't exist if you don't. But you could access the episodes on that website, sanctum.org, as well. And yeah, please drop us a line, get involved, send me hate mail, send me death threats, whatever.
That's funny. Tom, no, I think that's a great idea with sanctum.org, because, I've been researching myself for 12 years and I don't know how many notepads and files and different things that I have. And I'll be like, oh my God, I have so much great information. And literally some are on laptops from like 10 years ago that I got to get into, where I should have just archived it on something, So that's a great idea that you've done that. Do you allow other people to contribute papers if they're a part of the group, or if they
Oh,
find it?
yeah, and thank you for just reminding me. I should say this as well. We have a private Facebook group called the Sanctum Psychedelia Group. Come join. We talk about psychedelics. You could share whatever you like. We encourage thoughtful and kind discussion. So if you're into thoughtful and kind discussions about all things psychedelia, history, anthropology, psychology, spirituality, join the group. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. And one last piece of advice for those people that do want to partake, say here in the United States, and they want to go on their first, journey, whether it be with Amanita muscaria or psilocybin. What do you recommend they do, or is there anywhere you would want to direct them? Do you direct them just go to your website, contact you, or?
Yeah, because it's all very individual. And so, by all means, just reach out and, and we can talk about it and we could find what would be the best path for you. As in, I don't like to give general advice about this kind of stuff, because it is sacred and it is personal, and they can, they can enlighten you or they can destroy you. As we've said a few times over this, I guess almost 2 hours now. Wow, it's been 2 hours. Oh,
Yeah.
time flies, right?
Does.
But yeah, I would rather give individual advice. I ran a private education business for 10 years as well when I lived in New York. So I'm used to giving individual focused attention to each person who is, seeking it.
Yeah, that's great advice, not to give advice.
Oh yeah,
Basically general advice, because we're all different, and our psychic, where we're at in our lives and our past and our gnosis are different to everyone. And I know you need to talk to someone to see that. So Tom,
oh,
thank you for. Go
what,
ahead.
I'm so sorry.
No, I love
Also,
it. Go ahead.
youtube.com/psychedelic historian, or if you just search psychedelic historian or Sanctum Psychedelia on YouTube, we have pages that have Sanctum Psychedelia has our we threw our conference, and so we have those videos. My talk on the connection between the Amanita muscaria and Santa Claus is also on there. And yeah, mine is just youtube.com/psychedelic historian. Or if you just search psychedelic historian or Sanctum Psychedelia, YouTube, it'll come up.
Great. Thanks, Tom, for the information and sharing your time with the Gnostic Warrior community. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you. No, this was fantastic. I had a blast.
You're welcome. We'll talk soon.
Peace.
Peace.